Today with us is Tony Bates, a long-time member and friend of Eden. And I'm very happy that Tony have found the time to join us today. I know that you are, Tony, very busy with all the blogs and following all the issues and doing everything possible to help teachers and educators worldwide to do things better. So how are you feeling today?
I'm good, thank you. Yes, I'm feeling a sense of relief that eventually we will come out of this pandemic and return to some kind of normal, but it won't be the same as it was before. It will be somewhat different.
You have been in education for 50, 60 years now, is it so? Because I have looked at your bio, and it was in 62 that you have started as a primary teachers, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I'm very old. You get to do a lot of things.
Well, that was not my intention. My intention was to ask you, so you have quite an overview on education if we take 50 years from now.
Yeah, probably more importantly, I've had a breadth of experience. I've worked as a teacher in primary and secondary schools. I've taught remedial kids with learning difficulties. I've taught at university level. And I work with a lot of colleges and universities and government departments. So it's not so much the length of service, it's the variety that makes the difference, I think.
So looking at all these varieties you did and roles you had, and taking the overview of such long period of time, do you think today now we have come to a point of time where some big changes will happen? Or do you think that we already experienced so far some point in the time that enhanced the big changes and possibilities for education?
I think there are two things that are happening. What's happening inside education, and I think COVID-19 has had a remarkable impact on how instructors particularly think about, and students think about how they teach, because they've had to rethink that to some extent during COVID-19. So there have been changes happening in education, particularly with the rollout of new technologies, and they're still going on. We're getting things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality. So the technology never eases up, it keeps developing. And so that puts continuing pressure on the education system to change or to accommodate these new developments. And it's also what's happening outside, I think, is equally important. The way that the nature of the workforce is changing, particularly the digital economy and the kind of skills that we need to develop in students to survive in that rapidly changing external world. And to me, that's probably the more important influence or factor that we should be taking into account when we look at our teaching.
Yeah, so it has been 20 years since your book, Managing Technological Change, if I'm right. It was in 2000 when you wrote how universities and institutions should do these technological changes, should go forward into digital transformation, actually. So do you think in 20 years they did some significant steps, or this pandemic actually was a catalyst to make it happen?
I think we've seen a lot of changes since the web became popular. In Canada now, 10% of all post-secondary education course enrollments are in fully online courses in regular universities. So that's quite a big shift here. And in some institutions, up to 40% of the teaching is fully online, even on campus-based institutions. So given the 800-year history of universities, that change in 20 years is quite considerable. And it will increase, of course, after COVID-19. The second thing that hasn't happened yet to a large extent, but I'm pretty sure is going to happen over the next 5 years, is that online learning will be integrated much more with classroom teaching. So that I think COVID-19 particularly many instructors have realized now that the students' learning experience doesn't begin and end when they walk into the lecture theatre. There's a lot of study that students do on their own at home, and that's really critical to their success. It's not just attending lectures. They have to do other work, and I've always had to do that. But now a lot of that work can be done online, and that can be integrated into the classroom teaching so that students may set work, they can go off and do that online, they can do research, for instance, do a lot of research online, then come back into class. So I think we'll see that happening a lot more over the next few years. So that will change the dynamics of and then it raises interesting questions about what do instructors do in class when students can do a lot of stuff online. For instance, if you record your lectures and students can access those recordings, why are you doing them live next year? And if you're not doing them live next year, could you not use your time in a different way to support the students online, for instance? And I think those issues will emerge naturally because of the context in which the instructors are working, not because somebody in the teaching and learning center has been nagging them to change their teaching. But the teaching and learning centers will remain critical because they want help with that and they need somewhere to go. And I think the big thing about COVID-19 is it's forced many instructors to pay attention to what the Centers for Teaching and Learning do. And they've come to value them very highly as a result and look to them now as a resource much more than they used to before COVID-19.
Yes, I agree very much with you because I work in the support center for teachers, and actually now they find us much more like the colleagues, co-workers. Before we would just support that they used if they need it, mostly for technical issues. Now we are working much on the similar level jointly. And I said, we have our 5 minutes of glory now, finally, that they recognize what we do. Based on what you said, and if you can give some predictions how the future would look like without any constraints, financial or resources, what would be your ideal future of education, if it's possible to predict?
I think classroom teaching is going to remain very important for many students into the future. I think 18-year-olds, they want the social environment of going to a university, meeting other young people. It's not for the academic, it's not for the knowledge transfer or knowledge development that they need to be on campus, but it is for the other things that are critically important for students' development. So I don't think classroom teaching is going to go away. It's not going to be replaced by technology. There are too many other drivers behind that. What I do think we'll see is a much more differentiated system. I think we'll see some students who don't want the full campus experience. They might be older students, or they might even be, depending on the politics of the country, they might be poorer students who can't afford the full-time high costs of campus, and they'll be looking for cheaper alternatives that still have quality and value. And I think they'll be driven more towards, say, online learning. And I think there will be, if the universities don't provide that at lower costs, which they don't do at the moment, I think other providers will come in and do that. So I do see more differentiation in the system. I see much more blended learning as well as fully online, and some areas where it's nearly all face-to-face. I think the next big shift is going to come in the STEM area, in the science area, where I think we will see a lot more impact on practical work through simulations and virtual reality in the future. So I'm not saying we'll get rid of labs. I think students will still need to come in, but they may spend less time in a physical lab, spending much more time maybe on designing experiments using simulations, for instance. It's much easier to design experiments with a simulation than it is with in a real lab. So I can see some changes coming in STEM sciences with more use of digital learning as well. It's been an area that's been very difficult in the past to do online.
You said that classrooms will remain, and definitely I can see it myself. We have now quite a big experience and also research results on the issue of pandemic and how to teach in the pandemic and how to move to online and how did students feel, what teachers experience and so on. Do you think that teachers will go back, will vote for going to the classrooms, or how can they preserve this existing experience and integrate it into new ways of teaching and learning? What would be your message for teachers? How to move on?
I think that's difficult. If we don't have some way of training university professors in teaching before they start teaching, they're going to inherit the traditional ways that they were taught. Now, they may make some adjustments, like integrating perhaps some blended learning, but they're still going to be heavily content focused. What school teachers have an advantage is that they are taught about different pedagogical methods before they go into teaching. So in the long run, it should be easier to get the schools to integrate online learning than the universities. On the other hand, school systems are more top-down driven than universities. So it's really hard to make a prediction here. It's really up to universities are driven by the faculty. I mean, administration can come up with plans and strategies and so on, but in the end, it's the individual faculty member that has to change. And the reward system is still very much on research rather than teaching. Why would they change? It's a lot of effort. They'd have to get a lot more professional development to teach well in a blended or fully online system. So the institutional pressures to not to change are stronger than the ones to change. Now, that's been weakened during COVID-19, and it's increasingly being weakened as the external world changes. But nevertheless, there's so much inertia in the system still that, it will be a very gradual process.
Yeah, I agree with you. Lots of challenges in front of us. For the last questions, Eden organization is celebrating 30 years this year, and it's quite extraordinary for such an organization, non-profit organization as Eden, to exist for such a long time. What do you think, how can Eden contribute to better education and help educators and teachers to move out of this time to reach the new level and the better education for the future?
I think the real value of Eden is as a community of practice where people who have similar interests come and share experience. And I think you need to reach out more to the mainline instructors. I mean, at the moment, it tends to be specialists in distance education or instructional designers and so on. And I think you need to try to broaden your membership more to include faculty members with an interest in using technology for teaching. And I'm not even sure if the name shouldn't change, so it reflects that view that, we don't have really, I was interested, you had a debate about face-to-face versus online. That's not the issue anymore. It's not either or, it's a question of how do you combine both? Or what's the relative affordances or values of both, and how do we exploit those? And how do we make them work together in the best possible way for our students? So I think it's getting away from thinking of distance education. There will always be a very important role for distance education. There will always be a group of students who want fully distance, but that those lines are getting blurred now between face-to-face and fully distance. And I think that Eden needs to find a way of accommodating that, which is very difficult because suddenly you're relevant to everybody, but how do you identify yourself as different from when everybody is your target audience? But nevertheless, I think you really have to try and bring more mainline instructors in, and the ones I would focus on are the senior professors, the ones who carry a lot of weight in the department, who are open to change and want some and recognize they need some help, and that by belonging to Eden, they can get a lot of information that they can then pass down to their colleagues and so on, because that's how it really you get change. It's the senior professors making a change and bringing their younger professors along. It's not driven from the bottom, unfortunately.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for these messages. You give me food for thought, because I'm Eden president at the moment, so I have new tasks to do and think about how to ensure the next 30 years of Eden. Well, I'm very happy that you have been with us today, that you shared your information and thoughts with us. I wish you all the best, and thank you for this interview.
And I wish Eden all the best. It's one of my favorite organizations, and I wish I could play a larger role, but I'm obviously not in Europe now. But I think it's a great organization.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye.
Bye.